Hello my loves. Today we're talking about Onyx Storm. I wasn't going to read this book. In fact, I was never going to read anything else in this series, but you know me. Curiosity always wins, and apparently I love to torture myself, so I read it. I have already done a brutally honest review of Fourth Wing and Iron Flame if you would like to go and watch that. Small disclaimer, I made that video a very long time ago now. I do not remember 99% of what I said in that video, and I feel like I have found myself a little bit more since then, so don't judge old Nikki too harshly. Anyway, I couldn't help myself. I got it from the library, so I didn't have to buy it and spend any money on it because I am not spending money on this book series. And now we're going to talk about my honest personal opinions on it. In case it's not abundantly obvious, I do not like these books. I don't like this series. Obviously my opinions of this book are therefore going to follow with that. If you do like Onyx Storm or any of the rest of the books in this series, if you're like a die-hard fan of the Fourth Wing series, what's it called? The Empyrean series? This video might not be for you. That's okay. I'm glad that you enjoy it. Everyone can enjoy whatever they want. I don't, and I'm just sharing my thoughts on that. I'm aware that there's a lot of discourse and controversy about Rebecca Yarros as a person. I think potentially I maybe did comment on this a little bit in my video about the first two books. With that being said, I didn't really know much about what was going on at that point, so my opinions on it might not have been very well formed, so again, take what I said there with a pinch of salt. I am aware of the annoyance towards her around the use of Scottish heritage, the Gaelic language, which is, you know, kind of a dying language. It's not really used that much anymore. Scotland has a long history of being am I allowed to swear this early in the video? I can't remember how long it is. Taken advantage of, oppressed by England particularly, and so the kind of use of that language without her really knowing much about it, not even knowing how to pronounce things and just saying it doesn't really matter. I do understand the anger and annoyance about that. I'm not a huge fan of that. I don't think that's a particularly good way to manage that. If you wanted to take inspiration from a language that is not your own, then maybe do a bit more research on it and then, you know, respond to it better than how she did. I don't know if she said anything different since. I have not kept up with Rebecca Yarros. I do not care about her. That I can understand. I appreciate there's also a lot of other comments about her stance on Israel, mainly in the form of TikTok comments, and I am not going to comment on this at all because I've really not been able to find much statement anything outside of TikTok comments. That is all I've seen, and through further Googling and attempts at research, I've not really found much of what she supposedly said or did. If anyone has sources for that isn't just comments, let me know, but because I couldn't really find anything myself to form an opinion, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm not really wanting to comment on her as an author today. I'm just aware that there is controversy around her and people are going to mention it. We are focusing more on the book because I can tell you why the book's shit and why you shouldn't read it. I'm not really going to comment on her as a person. Let's just get into it. Onyx Storm pretty much picks up where we left off in Iron Flame. I'm not going to give you an overview of where that is for two reasons. One, that would be a lot of spoilers, and if you've somehow avoided being able to read these books, you might not want spoilers. The second reason I can't really give you an overview is because I have no idea what's going on. I read fairly comprehensive plot overviews of both Iron Flame and Fourth Wing before reading this book because it's been a while since I read them and I was not gonna reread them in preparation for reading this, and I was still very confused and didn't really know what was happening. That will become more of a comment and a criticism later, but yeah, I'm not gonna give you a detailed overview of what's going on in these books. I think I might have done that in my previous video. I'm also just gonna assume most people know what's happening. Basically, girl, dragons, war, romance. That's what's going on. But let's focus in on that a little bit, right? Because I mean, I had many problems with this book, but I can fit it into two. And the first one was the plot and pacing of this book was just bad. If you thought Iron Flame was slow, then let me introduce you to Onyx Storm because it is 100 times slower, and Iron Flame was frustrating to get through and read because of how slow it was at times. I would say for about 80% of this book nothing happens. I don't need books to be plot heavy. I don't need action every single page, you know, things just happening repeatedly. I need something to happen, especially if you're trying to write fantasy where there is a war going on. You would expect there there to be more things happening than are in this book. And then when things do happen, it's so sudden, so rapid, everything's happening so quickly that it was kind of difficult to follow what was going on. And it was just like this real sudden, like few pages or a chapter of intensity, and then we were back to the same conversations happening over and over again about what was going to happen or what they were going to do or planning things, but then never really actually getting to it, all those things happening. In my completely honest opinion, this was a filler book. That is exactly what it felt like, and I've seen other reviews say the same thing. This was pure filler just to get the series to have another book. That is what this felt like. There wasn't really any need for this book to be as long as it was. Maybe there wasn't even need for this to be a book on its own. Maybe it could have been combined with Iron Flame or whatever the next one's going to be called. I didn't leave this feeling like I knew really much more about what's going on, the characters, where the plot is going. We don't really get any plot development of the main overarching story, in my opinion. I'd say there's maybe like 5% of the book that is plot development or important or progressing things further. That's a tiny amount, and a lot of that happens at the end. This was very similar in Iron Flame, and there was like, this needs to be left on a massive cliffhanger that will get people to want to read the next one. But if the only thing that can draw the interest for the book is the last chapter of something suddenly happening and it being left on a cliffhanger, then that's not a very interesting book. You need to put stuff elsewhere as well to make it worth it, rather than just having something suddenly happen at the end. We didn't even really get character development either. In fact, I feel like these characters regressed throughout the whole of this book, and I will talk more about my problems with the characters in a moment. It actually feels like these characters are more just becoming so enmeshed in the few little traits that they have that they're just becoming caricatures of themselves. It doesn't feel like they are growing, changing, learning new things, shifting. It just feels like they are staying stagnant and stuck to the extent where they are defined by just like one trait, and that's all they are. They don't feel particularly real. If they were very, very, you fit into this and that's all you do. You have nothing else going for you. No development to be seen here. You are this and that is what you will remain. So if we don't get plot development, we don't get character development, what do you actually get in this book? You get some travel, admittedly. We go to some different places outside of the main war college, but the pacing of that felt weird as well. We didn't stay in those places for very long, so you didn't really get to know them. I'm not even sure you could say we get more world building either. I think the world building in the series in general is atrocious. I don't think this feels like a very good or fleshed out world, and I think it is purely there as a backdrop just for the romance rather than it really being thought about too much. But because we're traveling a lot, right, we go to a lot of different places, and so we see more of this world. As I said a moment ago, the traveling itself was very rushed. We didn't stay in any of these places for very long, so you just got like a little snapshot. Attempts to give a lot of information about these other little places in, I don't remember what the world is called, you know, whatever it's called. Little bits of information about that and the culture, but it felt very rushed and like an afterthought. To me, it very much feels like a lot of the world building in these books relies on the little like excerpts at the beginning of every chapter. And look, I think that kind of made sense in the first book because it was Brennan's diary that he'd left to Mira to give her tips and advice on how to survive and do well in the war college, right? It could have stopped there. I think it's not really relevant anymore to keep having these little excerpts from various old books that are apparently in this world, or various correspondence between different people. I get that this is supposed to be like the books themselves are supposed to be a account or translation by a scribe of the events of this war. I mean, in a historical account you wouldn't do that at the beginning of every chapter, but anyway, I think now they're almost there as a lazy way almost to world build, because it's like, oh, I haven't explained this thing at all or mentioned it before and it needs to be mentioned in this chapter. Oh, I'll just put a random excerpt at the beginning that mentions it so then it makes sense. And I don't think that's a very good way to do it, honestly. Shallow world building and messy plot aside, I'm the kind of person that can excuse that and also can excuse not the best writing if the characters are good. I'm a character girly. If I like characters in a book, I will struggle. I will go through whatever. And this is where I think the biggest problem for me with this series is that the characters are shit. So let's focus in for a minute on Xaden and Violet as like the main characters. I genuinely hate both of them so much. They are both insufferable, and I hope they both die at the end, and not after living a nice happy life. I hope they both die miserable. I hate both of them so much. Xaden first, right? I understand he's going through shit in this book, okay? Obviously no spoilers if you haven't read the previous one, but he is going through shit. I do understand that. However, what happened to his character? I don't remember him being quite this awful and cringy in the previous books. Maybe he was and I've just forgotten it, but it was painful at times. I lost count of how many times I just sighed while reading interactions between him and Violet. His entire personality is that he loves Violet, and I made this comment recently about a different romantasy series. I can't remember what it's called. This seems to be a recurrent thing in the male main characters in romantasy books just become simps, and that's their entire personality. All they care about is the girl they fancy. They lose any semblance of any other personality, and all traits they had before that could have made them interesting, and their entire thing just becomes her. I can kind of understand why that is and what they're going for, right? But I think it's overdone. It's not interesting. It doesn't make this character, in my opinion, likable or feel real. It just makes them shallow and boring. In this book particular, and again, I cannot remember if this was also the case in Iron Flame, so maybe I've just blotted it from my memory if it was, but his constant possessive jealousy over her was genuinely horrible to read. It was not hot, as I think it's supposed to be. It was in fact awful and immature. His reaction to a certain bit where he gets jealous was genuinely how like a 15-year-old boy would react to something. And this man's supposed to be what? I don't actually remember how old they are. Are they teenagers or are they in their 20s? I can't remember, but it was embarrassing. I was embarrassed for him, and I don't understand why like people love him, because it was not attractive in the slightest. He just looked like a man-child. Violet admittedly does have some personality outside of fancying Xaden. Unfortunately, the personality she has is about as appealing as Wet Sock. She is the definition of not like other girls. I can't even give you concrete examples of that because it's just in every single thought, action, feeling that she has. And I thought we were past that now, you know? I thought we'd grown up. I thought we'd moved past 2010, Wattpad, I'm not like other girls, I read books at One Direction, concerts. You know, I thought we'd moved past that, but clearly not. There are genuinely 2 or 3 times in this book where she goes up to Xaden and like takes his face in her hands and is like, Xaden, look at me. This isn't you. Like, she doesn't say that exactly, but it's those moments. And like, I thought we were all taking the piss out of them. Like, why? Why? Their whole relationship is so embarrassing. Just reads as 2 teenagers' first relationships where they have not yet developed emotional competence, and yet they're both supposed to have had like many relationships before this. And also, like, yeah, she does have personality, an insufferable one outside of fancying him, but there's a literal war going on. Violet, can you stop thinking every 2 seconds about how much you want to bang him and how attractive you find him? Like, seriously, there are more important things going on. There is too much romance in this book, and I know what you're gonna say. It's romantasy, there's supposed to be romance. Yeah, I'm aware of that. But there's not a balance here. This book is entirely irritating toxic romance with the attempt of a fantasy backdrop, especially if you've got something like a huge war going on, government corruption, people dying. It kind of then makes it frustrating to read when all the characters can focus on is each other. The reason this book feels slow and the reason nothing happens in terms of the plot is because Xaden and Violet are just having the exact same conversation over and over again, and it's the exact same conversation they've been having for 3 books. It's literally just a repeat of Violet being like, Xaden, I want you, but you're a dick. And then Xaden being like, I'm a really awful person. I could do horrible things. You shouldn't want me. And then Violet being like, don't tell me what to do. Then they bang. Then they argue again. And then it's just repeat for 3 fucking books. And here's the thing, right? They're together at this point, or they're supposed to be together at this point. Their constant arguing and not quite being together worked in book 1. It was getting a bit stale in book 2. In fact, it was getting incredibly frustrating in book 2. But they'd resolved all of that. Sorry, this is mild spoilers, maybe. By book 3, we should be past that, no? We're just creating reasons for them to be apart that make no fucking sense, just so we can try and continue that, oh, they can't be together, oh, we must keep them apart dynamic, which just doesn't really work or didn't really make sense. And that then became the focus of the book, rather than all of these other things that you've built up or discussed. I just feel like if there was more balance between the actual plot and the romance, potentially it could have been a little bit better and a little bit more enjoyable and not slow as fuck. And I appreciate there's a lot of like background characters and stuff in this book series. Well, there's a lot of background characters that you would think would then add some like variety or different dynamics to this. All of your favorite background characters from the last 2 books, yeah, forget it, they're barely in it. It was like we just forgot about them. They were barely there, aside from the odd conversation here and there. The problem is there was then other characters that were here, and there was too many. I had no idea who anyone was, including people from previous books, because there was just too many people to try and keep track of. Things being really slow and then suddenly shifting into there's a fight happening or we're being attacked and someone's died. I don't know who that was that died. Any character death that happened in this book, I don't know who that was or why I should be upset about it. People that were introduced that weren't really developed very well, so you didn't really know who they were. And then there were people that had been introduced in previous books that were just forgotten about and you hadn't mentioned at all for 99% of this book, and therefore I don't remember who they are or why I should care about them. So to some, I did not enjoy this book. In case you're interested, I rated it 1 star. I would obviously not recommend it. I wouldn't recommend any of this series, honestly. I don't think it's well written. I don't think it's a good example of fantasy or romantasy. We all know that I'm not the biggest fan of romantasy anyway. However, there are romantasies that I can see objectively are not well written and yet I can enjoy. For example, I recently read Filthy Rich Fae. Was that book well written? No. Did I have a fun time? Yes. So it's not that I just hate all romantasy, it's that I just really disliked this one, and that's fine that I didn't like it. If you like it, that's also fine. If you have if you have been keeping up with this series, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I'd like to hope I won't read any more of these books, but if I do, you know I'll be back here complaining about them in the future. But for now, that is all from me, so I hope wherever you are having a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.